Okay, that's done, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the September virtual scrutiny meeting. This meeting is being conducted under legislation that enables meetings to happen virtually, but the decisions that are taken are as valid as if the meeting happened in person at City Hall. We are looking at two main items today, one related to the LEP and the other for short-term lets. But I'll go through the agenda items. Number one, apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Sarmezi, and she's being replaced or substituted by Councillor Stutely today. We've also had apologies from Councillor Sue Sands. We're expecting Councillor Mike Sands to join, but he hasn't been able to as yet. And we're also expecting Councillor Viv Thomas to join us, but again, she hasn't as yet been able to connect into the Zoom. I have no questions from the public or petitions. Item 3, do I have any declarations of interest from members? No declarations of interest. Item 4, to agree the accuracy of the minutes from the meeting held on the 16th of July 2020. Are people happy that I sign those as being an accurate record of the meeting? Yeah, lots of nods and thumbs up, thank you. What I propose to do, particularly as we have invited guests, and rather than sort of hold them up, is to take item 5, which is the work programme, and item 6, which is the NHOSC update, and move those to the end of the meeting. So without any further ado, we'll move on to item 7, which is the New Anglia LEP. And I'd like to welcome and thank Chris Starkey from the LEP, who's the Chief Executive, for joining us, and Lisa Roberts, who's the Strategy Manager. Is that right? Head of Strategy, apologies, for joining us. We have a series of questions for Chris and Lisa, and Councillor Alan Waters, Leader of the Council, should be joining us shortly for this item as well. What I propose to do is spend most of the time looking at those questions, because they are many in number, and are split into 5 themes. We're looking at business theme lines of inquiry, COVID recovery, social equality, the environment, accountability theme, and voluntary sector engagement. Chris, I wonder if I could just ask you very briefly in just a couple of minutes for those people who are watching this meeting, just to say, what is the LEP, what do you do, and then we'll go on to the questions if that's okay. But thanks very much to both of you for being here.
So happy to do so. So the New Anglia Local Enterprise Partnership, we are one of 38 local enterprise partnerships who operate across England, which have a defined geography. So our coverage is Norfolk and Suffolk. We bring together partners from local government, from the private sector, the voluntary sector, and education. Who all sit around a board, all are volunteers who meet 10 times a year. The overarching purpose of the Local Enterprise Partnership is a kind of strategic function to develop a kind of blueprint for economic prosperity and growth across our geography, in our case Norfolk and Suffolk. We also act as a kind of intermediary to try and attract government, plus other sources of funding. European funding has been particularly helpful to us over the past few years. Government funding, European funding, but also to persuade and encourage other sorts of investment from the private sector as well. In terms of our delivery, we'll come on to, I'm sure we'll come on to some of those pieces. But we run a growth hub which provides free point of access support for all businesses across our 2 counties. We operate a number of enterprise zones. We run a number of grant programs to support businesses. We also work in the skills space particularly around enterprise engagement and career support in schools. And we also have a capital program which invests in key infrastructure, whether that's flood defences and broadband, or dare I say roads and other sorts of connectivity infrastructure. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, if albeit a big nutshell. Councillor Wright, I'm happy to move into the questions, and obviously in your hands.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Chris. So obviously, as members of the committee are aware, the questions were submitted to you ahead of time. So what I'm proposing is that I'll call on each member, and they'll read out their question and then get an answer. If, as the meeting progresses, some of the answers have already covered some of the questions, then I'll skip over those in order to ensure that we can get through as many as possible. But without any further ado, Councillor Giles, could I ask you to ask question 1, please?
Thanks, Chair. So my first question was in regards to whether you have an estimate of the number of businesses in the region in receipt of government loan schemes who will not be able to repay, and what support will be available to businesses in managing their debt repayments in the months and years ahead, both including those government loan schemes.
So I can give you an up-to-date figure on the number of businesses who've received loans. It's a spread, because the loans that were available were from really small businesses. So £2,000 was the smallest loan that was available under the bounce back loan, to many tens of millions of pounds from larger businesses and multinational corporations. I might have the stats if it's helpful for you, just to give you a bit of a flavour for the number awarded within Norwich. It's done by parliamentary boundaries for some reason rather than local authority boundaries. But within the 2 Norwich constituencies, so Norwich North and South, 160 businesses have so far been awarded the CBILS loans. So those are the larger loans. A total of £31.5 million has been awarded to them, and the bounce back loans, nearly 2,500 micro businesses and small businesses access those loans, so between £2,000 and £50,000, so £75 million. So in all, just over £100 million has been lent by by banks, but obviously with the guaranteed from the Treasury. In terms of your question, I think it's impossible for anyone to know how many will be able to pay or will not be able to pay. What I would say is the CBILS loans, while they had a Treasury backing, a Treasury guarantee of up to 80% of the value, the banks were lending them on the normal lending criteria they would ordinarily. So it was slightly more flexible, but not a complete change of rules. The bounce back loan was less sort of stringent criteria in terms of that. So I'm afraid I simply can't answer the question on how many. I'm afraid I can't predict the future really in terms of how those businesses will perform. I think there is an expectation that the vast majority will be absolutely fine and will be able to repay theirs, but it will be just wild speculation. In terms of the more specific stuff, what support is there available to help businesses in managing debt repayments? Well, I referred in my introduction to our Growth Hub, and so that is a network of business advisors free at the point of contact who will be able to and indeed do advise businesses every single day about their plans, whether it's about their expansion plans, whether it's about their finance issues, and so on. So that service is available. Of course, the City Council has its own economic development function as well, so there is some support available there. And of course, there are a range of nationally available money support services, whether it's the Money Advice Service or the Small Business Commissioner, National Deadline, and so on. So they will provide advice to those businesses. That's my answer, Councillor Giles. Happy to take a follow up if you have.
Thank you for that. As Councillor Giles also has question 2 as well, Councillor Giles, if you want to roll any follow-up and question 2 into your next section, that would be great. Thanks.
Does anyone else have a supplementary on that, or should I ask question 2?
Well, if you ask question 2, I'm limiting supplementaries initially, I think, to just the questioner, and then
Apologies for assuming, Chair, you would be.
Yeah, Councillor Giles, question 2 whenever you're ready, please.
Okay, so my second question was whether you have an estimate of the regional increase in unemployment following the end of the furlough scheme.
Yes, thank you to Councillor Giles. We commissioned some external work to look at this, because clearly this is one of a very significant concern. The furlough scheme has been utilised significantly by businesses in Norwich. I think I have somewhere the stats for the percentage of businesses using the furlough scheme, or percentage of the workforce, I should say. But in terms of the modelling work that we commissioned, we looked at broadly speaking, 3 scenarios. So a best case scenario, which is really a return to quick economic growth. So in the kind of letter shapes, a kind of V-shaped recession. So we drop out and drop and come back almost in as fast. It's probably fair to say the best case was an unlikely scenario, so but we still wanted to model that. The second one really is a middle case, so looking at a slow return to economic growth, but a return nonetheless, so a kind of U shape, so looking like that kind of, or the worst case really is a kind of lingering cloud over economic growth, so a much a deep in, as we know, the kind of that side of the thing we know about, and then really how quickly is the recovery. To be candid, all of the scenarios are not great. Even in the best case scenario, the potential peak was around 50,000 jobs at the last 50,000 people out of work at the last quarter of 2020. That does equate to similar to previous recessions. So the best case scenario is kind of as bad as the previous recession. So the best case scenario would see the unemployment rate peak of around 6.3% of Q4 in 2020, and gradually returning to something approaching the current levels around 4% by Q4 2021. So it takes a year to get back to where we were to make up that lost ground. That's the best case scenario, and the one I've just suggested is probably the least likely. The mid-case scenario, which was probably our working estimate, would be a sharp increase in Q4 to around 16%, and then remain above 10% through quarter 4 2021, and that takes us back to the kind of levels we haven't seen since kind of late 70s, well, early 80s really. The worst case scenario, of course, is worse than this, and that would see the rate rise sharply to over 26% in quarter 4 of this year and remain above 20% through Q4 of 2021. It's probably worth saying that would really be if there were no government interventions, if it just sort of, if the world kind of unfolded, and of course it would it's a kind of so worst case in terms of how businesses are performing. Just for a context, really, Norfolk has historically higher rates of unemployment than the counterparts in Suffolk, just to give that kind of comparison. But in the best case, we're talking about a rate of 6.3% in Norfolk. In the medium case, 15.9% in Norfolk, and in the worst case, 26% in Norfolk. The latest data we have show, because we obviously did this a couple of months ago, show that overall the economy has responded in line with our general projections. In terms of universal credit rates, furlough rates, the local economy is pretty much in line. Not a great line, but in line with, broadly speaking, the rest of the UK economy. and the rate of employment people furloughed, again, I think you'll want to know that, has edged up slightly from June. It was 28% up to 31% in the current figure, which is slightly below the figure for England, but within touching distance. So 31% for Norwich, 32% for England. It's pretty much it. So so we're obviously keeping a very close eye on all of the numbers. There are lots of moving parts, end of the furlough scheme, the appetite for businesses to retain staff, and so on. So and of course, you know, local lockdowns, all of that kind of stuff coming in. So it's difficult. It's fair to say it's difficult to predict the future. But and just to recap, in terms of the furlough figures, it was 31% or 20,000 employees were furloughed in Norwich. Don't know if that's answered. Sorry, I don't know if that's answered the question in full, Councillor Giles, but please remind me if I have. And indeed, I'm sure you will all do. If I've failed to answer the question for one reason or another, I'm sure you'll come back.
Councillor Giles, do you have a supplementary you want to ask at this point?
My supplementary was going to be, which sectors do you think are going to be hardest hit in terms of redundancies?
Yeah, look, I think I'm going to say some stuff that you would probably expect me to say. So retail, hospitality are clearly going to be finding it difficult. You can see that we all know that the retail sector was changing anyway. And it was a more challenging environment anyway, bricks and mortars retail and so on. So I think we know there will be some challenges around that in particular. Sectors like insurance, relatively sheltered. Manufacturing probably will be more impacted by what happens in terms of Brexit than this particular downturn and so on. And I suppose the cohort who have been most affected are young people. So a sector. It's not a sector of the a sector of the economy, but a sector of the workforce would be young people.
Okay, thank you. I've got a number of councillors indicating what I would like to do is only the question asked a supplementary, but I'm allocating some time at the end of each section to develop some other points further, because otherwise we're never going to make our way through all the questions. So thank you for that answer, Chris. The next question I'm going to ask, it actually comes from multiple councillors, but I'll ask it, and then we can. I will open this one up to supplementaries from all, because so many councillors were involved in this question. So, can you please provide more detail on the aspiration to invest in reskilling, and will there be a particular focus on sectors which are facing greatest difficulty? Which employment sectors have been identified as having potential for economic growth and job creation? Thank you.
Yeah, so this is a really good question. In a sense, cuts to the heart of kind of the next few months, really, next few weeks and months. So from our perspective, with our local industrial strategy and our economic strategy, which builds very much on Norwich's 2040 vision, we identified a number of sectors with potential for growth in future years. So those would be ICT digital, clean energy, and also agri-food, and brought together under a kind of clean growth umbrella. We believe that there are still, and COVID has not done anything to indicate that those sectors are not the right things to go forward. Or put it another way, we absolutely think there is still significant growth and potential, particularly in Norwich, around Digitech. Today was the launch of the Tech 100 with our colleagues at Tech East, which showed a really good showing of Norwich businesses within that regional league table, and showing some significant growth. We think there's huge opportunities around energy, particularly green renewable energy, as I'm sure will be positively received in this audience, and also and also in agri-food as well, particularly local food, reduction of food miles, all of those kind of pieces. So we think those sectors continue to have growth, and we would probably say, right, well, hang on, there are some other sectors who've been particularly impacted in a negative way or in a positive way, in different ways. So we'd probably add to that tourism, retail, leisure, hospitality, culture. That's always been an important sector for us, but actually there are, what is the plan for those? We've published with our partners, including Visit Norwich, a plan for the tourism sector. How does culture fit in with that, and so on? So what do we need to do about those in terms of retaining the assets we have, retaining the businesses and so on around there? And the other area is health and care, health and social care, and there are significant job opportunities. It's I think it's been an unrecognised sector hitherto. The COVID has clearly shown how vital it is and what strengths and opportunities we have there as well. So that, again, that's a slightly long-winded answer. I apologise for that. So our three core sectors built around clean growth, plus the tourism, retail, culture, plus health and social care. And in terms of those are the areas of focus that we're investing time and resources in terms of reskilling, upskilling, and job creation.
Thank you very much for that answer. Councillor Osborne, you've got a supplementary on that, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, when Chris Starkey, on when you say that that's where you'll be investing the resources in reskilling, do you mean that you'll be investing resources in reskilling people who are already working in those industries, or reskilling people who want to work in those industries? And the other question that I was going to ask is also about the aviation sector in Norwich Airport, which there's been people in my ward who've been hit by that and have lost their jobs already on that.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of reskilling, so largely it'll be about opportunities. So for people moving into those, but actually it'll also be about how do we take those businesses further forward. So health and social care, we think there's a good opportunity for us as the LEP to get engaged with how do we support those businesses grow, offer, in a sense, better services, become a more sustainable businesses and so on. Because of health and social care are not sustainable businesses, we've got a real problem. So it will be both. It'll be a but where there's growth opportunities, and by how are we investing in reskilling? Well, it will be through investments like the significant investment we've made in City College at their digital skills centre, investments and support we've made at Eastern College, and those sorts of things. Plus, of course, a range of other programmes, working with Job Centre Plus or the Kickstart programme and so on. And to be honest, when I say we, I think I'm talking the royal we, really, which is partners, whether it's City Council, whether it's County Council, whether it's the colleges and universities themselves, and DWP and other partners as well. Specifically about the aviation sector, it is a significant concern, the number of job losses at the airport. We've been talking to the airport about their plans, particularly given the economic driver that it is, particularly around that and the care and KLM and so on. So while it's not one of our big you asked me to list 4 or 5 sectors. It's not in those big 4 or 5 sectors, but it is an important part of our economy that we want to continue to support. We've invested in the Aviation Skills Academy, so we want to see the sustainability of jobs in that sector.
Thank you very much for that. I'm conscious of time and the number of questions, so I'm just going to move on to the next pair of questions. Councillor Giles, I wonder if you want to ask questions 4 and 5 as one, so that Chris can give an overall answer to those 2, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So question number 4 was, what assessment has the LEP made of the impact of both COVID and Brexit on Norwich Research Park? And question number 5 was, could you detail what role the LEP is playing in the regeneration of East Norwich?
Okay, happy to take those together. So in terms of the specific impact of COVID and Brexit on the NRP, we haven't done a specific piece of work, but as part of our restart plan, we looked at the different sectors, the different clusters, the different areas, and so on as part of that wider work. What we would say is that in terms of the types of jobs of employees on the Norwich Research Park, it hasn't been one of the most significantly impacted sectors. Many of the staff and so on are either employed through the NHS at the hospital, and have seen, there hasn't been a sudden turn off of their funding, and at the same time the research institutes still have reasonable funding. We're obviously interested in the fortunes of the individual businesses who are on the park and the opportunities to help support them, and there has been some downturn there. But as far as COVID is concerned, the NRP, I think, has escaped relatively unscathed. With our joint venture partners, the South Norfolk launched or topped out rather a building on the NRP, and that work has continued. Brexit is more of concern in terms of, particularly in terms of the sort of scientific exchanges and so on. We did conduct some research some time back on looking at the impact of the UK securing either an agreement or exiting with no deal, which of course the agreement seemed quite likely at the time, and no deal seemed less likely. In general terms, our modelling showed that no deal would not be as good as a deal, should we say? But I'm going to stop there on the basis that I think my answers are probably taking up too much time. So. Sorry, there was the second half of the question. I can't get away with it, not even answering the second question. Sorry about that. So in terms of the East Norwich Partnership, so the LEP is a partner within the East Norwich Partnership under the terms of reference there, and we have been, I think, over a number of years, sort of active partners behind the scenes, working with Graham Nelson and other colleagues, certainly in conversations with people at Homes England. We specifically have kind of taken the lead over the Trouse Bridge piece of work, which is interrelated with the site as a whole, and we chair a group which includes Network Rail, the Broads Authority, and of course the city, to look at improvements specifically around the Trouse Rail Bridge, and I believe Graham is seeking some funding from the Norwich Strategic Recovery work to take that particular piece of work forward. So I think we're engaged, positively engaged, and also through the town deal work where we sit working closely with City Hall on that. So we see East Norwich as an important project for which moving forward.
Thank you very much for those answers. Councillor Giles, do you have a supplementary?
Just to expand further on the likelihood of securing the necessary funding for the improvements to the Trouse Swing Bridge.
So the short-term piece of work, we will secure the funding. So that's through the Norfolk Strategic Fund. So that's a kind of small piece of work, an important small piece of work through the pool business rates process. It's the Norfolk Strategic Fund, which all local authorities in Norfolk set up to support the regeneration of the economy post-COVID. In terms of a longer-term piece of work, well, it's probably a truism that new rail infrastructure takes time and takes a while to build the case. And I think we've been, having regular meetings with Network Rail. Network Rail understands the rationale and the need for investment in the bridge. We've now got to build the financial and economic case for that. So I'm not going to say never. I'm not going to say tomorrow. Somewhere in between the two of those.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carlo, please, now with question 6. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chris. What sustainability assessments did the LEP conduct before awarding £1 million to the Honingham Food Enterprise Park, please?
Thank you. And I'm assuming you're referring to the infrastructure funding to sort of kickstart the site. All capital projects that we fund have to go through necessary planning permissions, and environmental impact is part of that process. We don't do a specific environmental impact ourselves, because that would be spending public money twice on the same thing. It's worth talking about a couple of particular things about this particular project. So, part of the infrastructure required here was provision of water storage. It's fair to say the existing Coleman site in Norwich operates probably in under old licenses and so on, in terms of water usage and so on. It basically comes out the river and goes back in the river. Clearly, environmental regulations quite rightly have changed since then. So in moving production of the processing of mint and mustard to a new site, new higher standards needed to be in place. So part of the reason for the need for capital funding was actually for that. So those environmental mitigation measures to be in place, as I say, including water storage on the site, thus reducing the environmental impact of that particular facility. So that's part of the reason why our money was required, so to directly support the environmental benefits of the scheme. And it's also worth probably saying as well, the second point in terms of the actual scheme itself. This is very the scheme that Councillor Carr is referring to is the Condimentum milling facility, which retains dry mustard milling within the Greater Norwich area, or on the edge of the city, but certainly retains it within the county. That would have been lost to either another part of the UK or possibly abroad. There are actually only 3 dry mustard mills in the world. All 3 of them are in Canada. So the air miles on that, or the carbon footprint on that, would have been not terribly good if it had to go to Canada and back. It enables local mint growers and mustard growers, who are the ones supplying it, to continue supplying the facility and process it locally. As I say, the alternative would have been a massive increase in food miles for those individual mint and mustard producers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carr, do you have a supplementary question for that?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you, Chris. Yes, to what extent do you see the food park as attracting and growing entirely new businesses, as opposed to existing businesses relocating to the site on the edge of Norwich, please?
That's a very good question. The answer is a combination of both. So the Food Innovation Centre that we are seeking funding through the RDF process, for a start, in terms of the environmental credentials of that building, will be BREEAM Excellent. Is the kind of standing for that particular building. So in terms of its environmental credentials, it will be a kind of exemplar building. So it will be a combination of those particular units. Will be very much about how we can encourage, nurture and develop our local food producers, who are in many cases working out of their own kitchen or their own facilities. They've maybe broken into the local food market. We're not expecting those businesses to become national players, but we want but how can they serve the Norwich area, or Greater Norwich area, or possibly the county of Norfolk in a more efficient and effective way, or rather at all. So it's very much about how we can attract and encourage those sort of cottage industry. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but those smaller producers to the site. And yes, there will be some relocation of larger producers as well, but again, that would be very much about how they can consolidate, make much more efficient in terms of particularly environmental, water usage, electricity usage than their current facilities. So it's the emphasis really is around smaller producers, high quality, low food miles, all of those kind of pieces, rather than what it absolutely isn't is some sort of just a bog standard industrial estate on the edge of a city. That's absolutely not what it's intended to be.
Thank you for that. Councillor Graham, please, with question 7.
Thank you. I was going to ask, what's the benefit to local people of enterprise zones? And I'm asking as a general interest, what's the benefits of local people since they, since there's a loss of local business rates and the like, but also more specifically to people who are in industries that need to shrink. Thinking oil, thinking aviation, we have a lot of very highly skilled people, and we're doing a lot to get people job ready. But what are we doing to get jobs ready for those people?
Yes, another good question. These are all good questions. So enterprise zones, and the reason we applied and secured enterprise zones across Norfolk and Suffolk sort of back a few years ago, the kind of principle, and one of the concerns I think about enterprise zones is, well, all you do is subsidise businesses, and they pocket the business rates, and they would have grown anyway. What we have, and that was a fair criticism of some of the enterprise zones in the 1980s, that actually none of the benefits are retained locally. The enterprise zones have a number of benefits, we think. The first thing is actually that the business rates are retained locally, so 100% of the business rates generated on enterprise zones are retained locally, so they don't go off to Rishi Sunak or his colleagues in Whitehall. We can decide how that money is invested locally. That's the first point, which is a kind of general point. In terms of then how we're using them to support sectors and so on. So I hear what you're saying about the oil and gas sector and so on. What we're using is, particularly in Great Yarmouth and Lowestoft, which I suppose are our most established ones, is how do we utilise the skills that people have in those sectors and transfer them into particularly offshore wind, but all sorts of renewables. So it could be around retrofitting of housing. It could be around biorenewables. It could be around hydrogen and so on. So by and actually we launched yesterday the first cohort in our Fit for Renewables programme. So that is about saying to businesses who hitherto have been in the oil and gas sector or aviation or other sectors, saying, right, there are big opportunities in the renewable sector, but you need to take a number of steps to get accreditation, to wind and so on to do that. So we announced our first cohort of businesses, and I think there are 2 or 3 from Norwich who are participating in that particular programme. Have deviated a little bit from the enterprise zone point, but it's part of that. It's part of that focus. The Norwich Research Park is also an enterprise zone. Why is that an enterprise zone? That is about how can we ensure that the businesses that come out of the huge intellectual capacity there are retained within Norwich and don't have what has been happening, are simply attracted to Cambridge with venture capital funding or other opportunities down the road in Cambridge. Now, and that's because we'd prefer those businesses, those opportunities to be available on the doorstep for people in Norwich of all shapes and sizes in terms of the people.
Thank you very much. Councillor Graham, do you have a supplementary?
I'm really pleased to hear about the retrofitting. That's a really important part of the picture. I just wondered if there's if tidal is also part of the picture. In terms of transferable skills, but also in terms of massive amounts of energy, and the tide never stops. And if we'll be affected by is it Hitachi pulling out of Walther? Are there is there any likelihood of them pulling out of Sizewell too?
Which depends on your point of view. I suspect you'd like them to pull out of out of Sizewell. On that, well, that's a decision for EDF around Sizewell. In terms of tidal, absolutely, there are opportunities around tidal. It's without going to the boring sort of technical details, the southwest is probably a better location in terms of tidal. However, there are certainly aspirations to look at tidal. There are also aspirations around hydrogen. And also floating offshore wind and so on. So collectively, we think there are significant opportunities, and as I say, retrofitting and so on. All of those offer great opportunities, and in a way that for us the key thing is trying to create those pathways for young people right now in school, thinking where are the jobs that they can move into in all of these areas. So thinking about engagement in schools, about these real proper careers that in many cases don't exist right now. Thinking about then the courses at the colleges, and then the jobs, making sure they're available to people locally.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am conscious from we're 7 questions in now of 23, so I may need to look along the way as to how the meeting's going to go, but Councillor Stuteley has messaged me to say that he has a quick question to ask on question 2. So Councillor Stuteley, please.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, Chris. You gave us some pretty worrying projections for unemployment in Norfolk under different scenarios. I wondered if the projections there are expected to be spread evenly across the county, or whether Norwich would take a particularly bad hit or otherwise. And the second part to that is, what is the likely situation if we have a second lockdown? Thank you.
So to answer your second question first, I think the second lockdown is sort of built into our worst case scenario. So I don't think there's an even worse than that, if that makes sense. And your first question, unemployment has been relatively spread across both our counties in our case, Norfolk and Suffolk, and we've seen and one of the curious things we've seen from universal credit data is that Norwich and Great Yarmouth have not seen they've seen a big increase, don't get me wrong, but percentage wise places like South Norfolk and Broadland have seen much bigger increases. So I think the short answer, and I will try and keep my answers a bit shorter, is it will be spread. I don't think we'll be able to say Norwich is likely to be worse or thing, but I think to coin one of those awful phrases, we're all in it together, and I don't think Norwich will be particularly badly hit.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next section now, which is COVID recovery and social equality. Questions 8 and 9 are both from Councillor Osborne. I think it's going to roll them together into one in order to help with the timing. So Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chair. Just actually leading on from what Chris just said about universal credit, my question is about there's in the LEP recovery plan, it talks about working with DWP and Job Centre Plus and professional services to ensure employers and employees are aware of and have access to available support programs at the earliest point. And often that earliest point is actually universal credit, which means a 5-week wait to receive benefits, and even then often leaves people destitute. So I would want to know what whether there's support for people who are waiting for universal credit through their employers if they are, or former employers if they're being made redundant. My other question is sort of linked to that about social mobility. There's quite a lot of talk about creating jobs and reskilling jobs, but and you've talked about a V-shaped or a U-shaped recovery, but there's also potential of a K-shaped recovery where you get some people going up and some people going down. And how are you sort of addressing that?
Okay, so so in terms of the general point about working, how do we make employers and employees aware of provision that's out there? I suppose this is my kind of first request of all of you. What we recognise is there is a lot of help out there in different ways now. You're quite right that in some cases 5-week delay and all of that kind of thing. But there are an awful lot. There's a large number of programs out there that government has developed that businesses are sort of a bit of aware of and so on. But ultimately, people, the thing that companies know about is, well, we're making redundancies and we announce them and this is the process we go through. But actually what we want to do is try and encourage and ensure that employers do not just go for the, well, let's make people redundant. So look at other options before they pull the trigger, because once people are made redundant, that's kind of their with Job Centre Plus and so on. So our job support program really is about is a sort of two-strand program, and I'd be really grateful if details of this are able to be circulated. So it has two strands to it. One is engagement with employers, so through our growth hub and so on, to try and reach out to companies to explain to them the options that they have open to them. So, for example, how do they get involved with the Kickstart program rather than making people redundant? How do they consider making more flexible pay or those sorts of things that they can do? So they don't just have to change people's lives sort of irreparably and so on. So we've launched this scheme which has information to employers, but it also has we have a web-based triage scheme for individuals who haven't necessarily yet been made redundant but are kind of worried about it. So it provides a signposting service, really providing information about all the different things that are out there. So you think you might be made redundant but hasn't quite got that, but you might want careers advice just in case. You might want information that you're not feeling that great about it. What's your mental health provision and so on? What services out there to support you and so on, if you're anxious and so on about it. Or if you think, well, actually, maybe if I am made redundant, I'd like to become self-employed, but I'd like to sort of find out about that now and so on. What about apprenticeships and so on? So that is a kind of, and there are so many different strands and so on to all of this that we put them all together under our job support programme with full backing of DWP plus local authority partners, including City Hall. And we're just keen for people to promote this opportunity. We also have on our website our employment opportunities page, because obviously people are looking for work at the moment, and we've got around 300 employers promoting vacancies. About 23,000 people have viewed the site since we launched it in the summer, and our job support program was launched first week in September, and 500 people have used the service in that first week. So it's not a magic bullet, but it's but trying to bring together some of all of this stuff that's out there to help where we possibly can. And social mobility, just to make the point, really, our economic strategy going forward really has two pillars. One is around clean growth, and the other is around social mobility or inclusive growth. So we really talk about inclusive and clean growth and inclusive growth, whichever way you want to phrase it, because a K recovery would be a disaster in so many ways, really, that we ended up with some people being absolutely fine and thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with the world, but there's a significant cohort, particularly young people, who've been left behind. So we are, in terms of our own interventions and so on, reviewing both in the light of the kind of low carbon, so clean, what are the criteria we need to put in around that, but also around social mobility. So that, again, sorry, I put a bit.
Thank you very much for that answer, Chris. Some really interesting points there. Councillor Osborne, would you like a supplementary question there, please?
Yes, if I may just to sort of a question a bit further on that social mobility thing. Sort of what are the sort of specific actions that are being taken to support social mobility that, again, maybe as ward councillors we can be directing people to or supporting people on?
Yeah, so I think a couple of particular things are looking at our own investments, so our own grants, our own whether it's capital programs, whether it's individual business grants, to look at schemes. So, for example, our growing business fund scheme has in Norwich alone has invested about £2 million in grants over the last few years, and the couple of hundred jobs we've created through that. What we really want to do is and we're looking to do is to say, well, these grants shouldn't just be for any sort of jobs. What are the how are we building social inclusion into that? So how are we ensuring that the people aren't being hired just the first people who turn up and so on? How are we actually trying to crack low social mobility attainment and so on at the same time and so on? So that's one example. Second example really is that we are sort of proactively engaged in the Norwich opportunity area. I chair one of the groups within that, and seeing the work we do there through our schools, our enterprise advisors and so on, particularly working with the individual schools, head teachers on and trying to bridge that gap between business, which to be blunt is so often so far removed from this stuff. So getting a greater understanding of all of those pieces.
Thank you very much for that. We now move on to the next section. I'm going to deviate slightly now because we've got got a significant number of questions about the environment, and I'm going to give the questioners some time to think about whether they could roll those into fewer questions while I then move on to accountability. So just most of the questions on the environment are from Councillor Carlo and Councillor Osborne, so I don't think we'll have time to go through all of those. So just think about questions 11 to 19 and whether they can perhaps be reduced because I think time's going to need that. So I'm going to move on to accountability, which is question 20. Councillor Carlo, this question is actually for Councillor Waters. So Councillor Carlo, please.
Thank you, Chair, and hello, Alan. Alan, you're a member, as our council leader, a member of the LEP board. So how do you ensure accountability to the public when you sit on the board? How do you gather members of the City Council for helping to shape LEP policy, and how do you report back, please? And just to say that I'm finding today's session really very helpful and very informative, and I'd like to thank Chris, Lisa and Alan for coming today, and hope that we can repeat it another time.
Yes, I'm pleased that Chris has been able to come along, and also Lisa. So the first thing to say is that I'm one of, I think, 6 local authority representatives, and there's a sort of a permanent 4, which is myself and the leader of Ipswich, representing the 2 major urban areas, and the 2 leaders of the county councils representing that sort of wider rural context, first tier authorities. And then there are 2 other district council reps, one for Norfolk and one for Suffolk, who represent and feed back to the other district councils. And it's kind of interesting just to bear in mind that local enterprise partnerships are about a decade old, and they replaced, when the coalition government was elected in 2010, regional government officers. And once upon a time, within that structure, there was also a regional assembly in the 1990s made up of a number of stakeholders, but also including elected representatives. So how do I represent the council and the people of Norwich? Well, first of all, by being a regular attender at meetings, serving on one of the boards, which is the investment panel, and also being, I hope, a credible representative on the LEP. So, you know, one has to play the part as a member of the board, and that is a wider remit. But I think the points that Chris has made about the very broad strategies that the LEP is engaged in around big issues that we are concerned around: social mobility, investment, supporting people with getting the necessary skills they require, issues around carbon neutrality. These are things that we as a council are particularly concerned about. So there's an opportunity for me to reflect those issues and others, I suppose, through the prism of the policies that we have collectively agreed as a council. And we have a corporate plan which goes through a process and is voted on at full council. It goes to scrutiny, inevitably is assessed by the audit committee, and is also part of a wider piece of work around Norwich 2040, where every party is represented on that broad partnership of stakeholders and organisations. So when I go to those meetings, when I go to LEP board meetings, I am seeking to reflect the things that I have been charged through our democratic processes in the city, to reflect in my contribution to the LEP board and to LEP initiatives and policy development. So, for example, myself and David Ellesmere, representing urban areas, very keen, and the LEP has reflected this in its various strategies, that there is a focus on place. So there are important key sectors across the LEP area, which we collectively want to strengthen and enhance. But there's also an economic, social and political dynamic around making sure that key places like Norwich and Ipswich, there are others, but from our point of view, those voices are heard, and that urban areas get the recognition that they should have as important drivers of the economy. I think the other thing to understand is this point about partnerships. And I meet Chris and other LEP board members on any number of the partnerships that are based, among other places, in the city. So the Business Improvement District. We both sit on the Good Economy Commission. We share and contribute towards the LEP's ambitions to be carbon neutral over the next period. And so in that sense, we are bringing to the table things that we have collectively agreed. We may have some differences as different parties, differences of emphasis, but broadly speaking, I'm taking those issues forward. And I suppose if I pick up one particular strand as one illustration, it's the work around living wage and good employment practices. And so one of the things that was accepted by the LEP board was that when we were investing public money in companies, that we had an understanding of what types of jobs we were funding. And it is particularly important at this time that people do get good employment opportunities, and we do look at wages and terms and conditions of employment as part of that. I'm actively working with Chris on setting up a trade union economic roundtable, because I believe the trade unions have a significant knowledge about how different economic sectors are working, and trends within the areas that they cover in representing workers. So we bring to the table the things that we are concerned about as a city, but we also are interacting with the LEP through the many partnerships that we currently have. And some of those are Norwich based, like Norwich 2040, others are more widely based. I suppose also in another practical way, if there's a key documents which are published by the LEP, I will circulate those, though I have to say the LEP's website is comprehensive, so there are opportunities for members, any members on the council, to take a look at what the LEP is currently doing. And of course, clearly we have opportunities like we have today in terms of Scrutiny Committee wanting to investigate further the work of the LEP and its current thinking, but there are also opportunities through the reports that come to Cabinet, and also items that would come to full council. So I think that's how I view my accountability, and fundamentally is bringing to the table at the LEP the things that we as a city council have developed by way of strategy, and how and issues that have been engaged with and shaped by discussion, not just within the administration, but opportunities that have been provided to all parties on the council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Waters, for that comprehensive answer. Councillor Carlo, do you have a supplementary question for Councillor Waters?
No, just to thank Alan and to say, to save time, I won't ask a supplementary. Thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring in Councillor Manning, though I think does have a supplementary question on this, and as Councillor Manning hasn't asked any other questions, give him the opportunity. Councillor Manning.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Alan, and thanks, Chris, very much for your lengthy answers. My question is quite prosaic, really. I always like to have a look at what information is available publicly on some of the bodies that we have coming to talk to us on the scrutiny. So I had a quick look at some of the recent minutes from NALEP online, and just if I'm off beam completely, do say so, but I think possibly this underpins some of the concerns that members sometimes have about local accountability for the application of money. I see that the according to the minutes anyway, those attending are split between panel members and those attending. The panel members presumably are responsible for the approval of applications for loans or grants, but those panel members exclude local authority members, and I wondered whether that was by accident or design, and whether local authority members do have say-so in where funds eventually go. And also just connected on that, taking the most recent minutes as an example, there are specific applications that are talked about, but there's also what looks like a subgroup of I think small, sorry, I'm peering at my phone here, small grant scheme distributions, which although individually quite small, collectively are quite large as well. So for the last quarter, I think 100 odd grand has been applied. Did the decisions of the Growth Board Fund go anywhere for subsequent sort of ratification or approval, or is there say so on the distributions final? And apart from attending those meetings, did local authority board members actually have a say so themselves? I hope that makes sense.
Well, makes perfect sense. I'm happy to pick that up. I'm sure my board member will have some views of his own if I go off beam myself. In terms of board decision making, the full board is the ultimate decision making, but like every body, there are boards within. The main investment decision-making body is the Investment Appraisal Committee, of which is actually chaired by a local authority leader, so is the same mix of local authorities. In fact, Alan, I think you're on Investment Appraisal Committee. You are, yes, as is David Ellesmere, who chairs that sub-board. So we have a scheme of delegation which kind of sets this out in more detail, but broadly speaking, all investment decisions are either taken by the main let board or by the Investment Appraisal Committee, unless a particular programme is specifically delegated. So let me just explain that. The Investment Appraisal Committee itself only has delegated authority to approve funding investments of up to £500,000. So anything above £500,000 goes for consideration by the Investment Appraisal Committee and then comes up for recommendation. So anything above £500,000 must be approved by the full board. Anything beneath £500,000 can be approved by the Investment Appraisal Committee. And as I say, that is comprised of a mix of local authority and private sector, so it has the same configuration. I actually think the local authority percentage is slightly higher than the main board on IAC, although that's not particularly by design. So there's absolutely local authority representation. There are two delegated grant schemes for which there are officer panels who do the awarding, and those are small, by definition, small grants, and the decisions then are notified to the Investment Appraisal Committee, who have oversight of that, and also then through to the main board. So that's the kind of process. It's the particular funding streams have the process are, so the small grant scheme is funded by EU funding, so has really rigorous accountability attached to it, and also the methodology and the governance procedure has to be signed off by central government as well as ourselves, and the same applies for so that is that scheme. Growing Business Fund is another scheme that does have a panel which again has recommendations back to the IAC. That scheme, I think you're right, only has private sector members on that particular panel rather than public sector panels. So hopefully that's a comprehensive answer. But in terms of details of who's on what panel, they are all up on our website. I'm happy if you have concerns or what have you to sort of go through it in more detail.
I mean, I would just add that the investment panel which I sit on looks very thoroughly and in detail at applications for funding, and really tests whether it is appropriate to use public money to fund an organisation. So, for example, sometimes we get developers wanting some help with putting in infrastructure on, let's say, greenfield sites, and you look at the details of the company, and you, for example, say, well, actually, you've got plenty of money to do this yourself, and where's this? And where's the social housing? And you know, those sorts of things certainly don't win favour with me, nor often the rest of the panel. So I have to say the investment panel has been is an important part of the decision-making structure of the LEP, because it's quite, you know, if you just simply have a main board going through stuff, then you know the scrutiny of that is more difficult given the pressures of time and agendas and so on. So I think as things have evolved, this has been a good benefit, and that particular committee is well represented. I think Andrew Proctor, the leader of the County Council, myself, and David Ellesmere, leader of Ipswich, who chairs it, give that a very strong local authority voice.
Okay, lovely, thank you very much both, it's great.
Yes, thank you. Just sort of one of the roles of chair is to keep an eye on the time. So the committee had wanted to spend about 90 minutes on the LEP. we've got 21 of those 90 minutes left at the moment. What I propose to suggest is that questions 21, 22 and 23 are asked. Chris, if you are happy, and also Lisa, to perhaps provide written answers for questions 10 through to 19, then we'll provide some time at the committee that we can consider those at our next meeting. But I'll let our members of the committee sort of think about that, because we'll discuss that when we come to our work programme. But in the meantime, could I ask Councillor Carlo to ask question 21, please? Denise, you're muted.
Yes, so, beg your pardon, yes. I think in some ways Chris has partly responded to this earlier. So what monitoring of its policies, programmes and funding does the LEP carry out with a view to understanding the impact on sustainable development, please? Obviously it relates back to my questions at 12, 13 and 14.
Of course, I understand that. So in terms of our policies, so we, like any sort of corporate body, like a local authority, we will review our policies pretty much on an annual basis, and those policies are all available on our website. In terms of our programmes, we monitor, and so we monitor as an internal process. So as a management team, we monitor the performance of our programmes pretty much on a weekly basis, and of course then as the board and the investment appraisal committee, which we talked about earlier, have a kind of dual role in informally monitoring each of the programmes. So reports are provided on the performance of all of our programmes, and indeed the use of our funding, to every board meeting and every investment appraisal committee. In terms of their impact on sustainable development, that forms part of the overall monitoring process. There isn't anything specific that's done on top of that.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Carlo, do you have a supplementary there?
Lots, but I won't ask them now.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to the next section. We've got a couple of questions from Councillor Osborne on the voluntary sector, questions 22 and 23. So Councillor Osborne, if you'd like to ask question 22, please.
Chair, just as for procedure, I did message you in the chat that I'd actually prefer to ask one of my other questions, as I think it relates to some of the other things that were discussed earlier.
Are you therefore then happy to get sort of written answers on 22 and 23?
Yes. So
yep,
question
okay,
11, if I may.
Happy with that approach. So question 11, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so this is about the Clean Growth Task Force, which the New Anglia LEP is in the process of setting up. And my question is whether that will be setting targets for carbon reduction, because it's very good to know that it's being set up, but if we're going to be meeting the target set by the Tyndall Centre of about 12% or 13% emissions reductions year on year by up to 2050 as a sort of minimum target, when you consider that we've been cutting emissions by about 0.6% over the last 20 years on average, that's an incredibly ambitious target, and I don't see how it's going to be done under current plans. And just to give two examples that build on what was said earlier, so the retrofit program has been mentioned that the LEP's supporting. According to a report that was published in January earlier this year, I think we'd be needing to retrofit something like 1.5 million homes in the east of England, starting with several 100,000 in the first year that's just already ending. And so where's that money coming from, and what are we doing to start delivering on that? The other question then is, there's lots of good talk about supporting renewables, but there's also talk about supporting fossil fuel industry. So Chris, you mentioned earlier about supporting the aviation industry, when you consider that that's the fastest growing contributor to global heating, and also one of the most socially unequal I would question whether that's actually sustainable socially or environmentally. So I suppose it's how are we actually going to meet those targets?
Okay, Councillor Osborne, if it's okay, I'm going to pass on to Lisa Roberts, who's head of strategy at the LEP and who's been working on the development of the Clean Growth Task Force and can answer far more eloquently than me on these particular points.
Oh, I don't know about that, Chris. You've been doing a good job, so I will try my hardest. Good afternoon, everybody. So I suppose to give you a very straight answer, the intention is not to develop any targets. The development or the establishment of the Clean Growth Task Force has been delayed due to the distractions that we've had in responding to the COVID-19 response. However, we do see it as a very important step for us to ensure that we do live up to the UK Clean Growth Region, and we have now started and found some time and resources to ensure we can get the task force in place by the end of this year. And I suppose the reason why we won't be looking at setting targets is because many organisations in the area have already set their own targets. Actually, what we're keen for the task force to do is identify the 2 or 3 big things that collectively we can do across Norfolk and Suffolk to really make a big impact, and develop the evidence base that we can then set targets for that specific area of focus. So whether that is around ensuring we're moving towards a working with the big emitters, for example, the energy and agri-food sector are the big emitters across Norfolk and Suffolk. So are there specific activities that we can do collectively with them to bring down their emissions? So I don't know whether I've answered your question, because there was quite a few in there, and I'm more than happy to pick the others up.
I mean, the kind of overarching message is that we kind of believe really in a number of significant tangible actions rather than a headline grabbing target.
Yeah.
We don't really want to be particularly as the metrics behind individual targets and so on, and in a way getting distracted by months of what is the right target, it can't be all of that kind of thing, because there are so many different ways of measuring it. So and as Lisa said, a number of different organisations already have targets. So which do we go with? Do we go with the one that Suffolk County Council's one, or do we go Norwich's one, or that's our challenge.
Thank you both for that answer. Councillor Osborne, I believe, has a supplementary question.
Thank you. Just to say that we do have, we don't have to debate the targets because there's a national set-in law target for 2050 carbon neutrality. And when you look at what the Tyndall Centre has done in estimating or working out the amount of emissions that we need to see, that can also be broken down sector by sector. So we do have those targets already, but I suppose my point about this is I don't see how the actions that are being taken at a regional level actually add up to anywhere near meeting the requirements of a 2050 carbon neutrality target, let alone a sooner one, which is what both Norfolk and Suffolk have set. And I suppose that's why I'm asking for a sort of action plan that shows how we're going to get there.
Well, it's a fair challenge, and the truth is we haven't done as much work on this as we'd have liked to have done over the past 3, 4, 5 months, because of the worst economic crisis since 1930s has kind of got in our way. And to be blunt, one of the challenges going forward is going to be how do we balance the need to create jobs, the need to create inclusive jobs, and create clean jobs at the same time, and so on. And that's, I think, going to be a challenge for all of us. But I also accept your point, absolutely accept your point, that just doing a few things is almost ignoring the problem or pretending you're solving the problem, whereas actually there needs to be some sort of significant bold action. Our feeling on it, though, is it needs to be bold action that that has kind of popular support amongst business or the population. Otherwise, you may end up going in the wrong direction. So our approach would be to work with business, work with industry. As a little example of it, production of hydrogen that could significantly offset our biggest emitter is Great Yarmouth Power Station. Well, if that was not just a gas power station but a hydrogen gas power station, that would make a significant step. How do we drive an EV strategy for electric vehicles across Norfolk and Suffolk? One of the challenges, of course, is we can say, well, we're not going to drive. Transport is absolutely, as you've quite rightly said, is one of the great permitters. But if you're in a rural community, you need to be able to get about. So how do we try and square some of those circles while recognising your absolutely well-made point that that doing a little bit is absolutely not enough?
Thank you. Councillor Osborne, I think you've got just
one final sort of question or point. I mean, you mentioned that this is the biggest economic recession since the 1930s, which is true. It's also potentially one of the biggest, could be made into one of the biggest opportunities for that sort of system change, shift change in our entire ways of working, ways of traveling that we need to be able to move to a more fairer and cleaner society with those environmental targets in mind.
Here's a short answer to that. I agree.
Thank you. So I sort of moved on before getting an answer from Chris and Lisa, I think, in terms of, will you be happy to answer the questions in written form that we've not been able to ask today?
Yes. Well, I'll be delighted. Lisa will be doing the work. So
okay, thank you. But we don't call it quite a day yet, because I know that Councillor Ryan has a question that is not one of the numbered ones, but I think a point that he'd like to make that's come up. So thank you, Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 22 of the LEP report. It's about restarting the economy. I'm particularly interested in the launch of the peer-to-peer network next summer, supporting SMEs with their business plans and new technology, etc., leadership, management support. Chris, can you give us a bit of a taster of this? How is this going to work, and how will it help Norwich?
Oh, brilliant! That's a helpful advert for our new scheme. So thank you, Councillor Ryan, for that. So we have been awarded just over £300,000 by government to run a peer-to-peer programme. So there'll be peer-to-peer networks across the 38 LEPs. In a nutshell, what they are an opportunity for cohorts of 11 businesses. We'll be working with about 250 between October, so very soon. I think you talked about next spring. I think it's next month.
You had summer in the report, but you know better than I do.
Well, only the reports, as they say, out of date. So we so the government money came sooner than so starting next month. So the idea is for a facilitator to work with each cohort of 11 businesses from a range of sectors, from a range of sizes. It's really down to the businesses who want to participate in it, and to kind of work through some of the challenges they face. And you know what, the green economy, decarbonisation will absolutely be part of that. How can they take their businesses? How can they take advantage of those? How can they work in a kind of the challenges faced by Brexit, challenges faced by raising money if they borrowed money, the very first question, and so on. So all of those things to provide peer-to-peer support, because so often businesses best means of support is by working with each other. So we are in the throes of developing that program right now. We're starting to recruit businesses who are interested in participating in it, and we have a call at the moment to recruit a number of facilitators to run the program for us.
My question was, do businesses come to you, or do you go to them? How's it going to work?
A bit of both. So yes, businesses can come to us, and there is and we can circulate the web link, if you like, with our written answers for that. So we're looking for businesses to come to us. However, we'll also, through the Growth Hub, and the Growth Hub talks to businesses every day, we'll be encountering businesses who might be right for this particular program or another program, and so on. I mentioned our Fit for Offshore program. So businesses can absolutely apply to us. There is, as I say, there is a website where they can, right now they can register their interest, and it's not quite first come first serve, but there'll be a kind of a bit of a check as to whether the business, it's a free product, so it's a free, it doesn't cost the business anything, but it will cost them time. So is it the program that they think is right for them before they sign on the dotted line.
So it's free advice rather than free money.
Free advice. And in terms of free money, well, we do have a range of other grant programs and so on. Where funding is available. But yes, free training, free advice, and free training.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I think in terms of time, I'm going to draw the questioning aspect of this to a conclusion. I'd like to thank Chris and Lisa and Alan very much for coming along today and answering questions so fully. I'm sorry that we weren't able to deal with all the questions, but if we can get those answers in written form, that would be great. We'll have them circulated to the committee ahead of our next meeting. If the committee is in agreement, and I'm sort of looking for nods on this, if you're in agreement, we'll consider that at the next meeting, along with any possible recommendations from the full answers that we've received today. But we'll discuss that.
Just a point of clarification, do you want written answers for them all, or do you just...
Oh no, sorry, just written answers for the ones you weren't able to answer today, and then we'll consider everything what we've heard today and those answers at our next meeting. We'll talk about that at our work program when we look at that later on in the meeting. But yes, I would then expect that any recommendations we have will come out from that October meeting. But thank you both very much, and also Alan as well, for coming along and joining us today. We've got a couple of other people in the waiting room who will admit to look at our next piece of work, which is on the small let. So thank you both.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
So we'll just have a brief pause while we let Carol and David in. Welcome, Carol. Welcome, David. Can I check that you can hear us all okay and everything?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Right. Got a quick question from Councillor Viv Thomas. Viv.
Hello. Can I just check, as a private renter, do I need to declare any interest in this item?
Looking to someone from Democratic Service to have a view on that. Jackie.
Sorry, Councillor Thomas. Are you a short let private renter? Sorry.
Well, it's been renewed for 12 years, if that answers the question.
There are reports about Airbnb and short-term.
Well, it's not a regards. No, we're not.
If that's the case, I don't think you've got interest. Then, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we're on item 8, report from the Scrutiny Committee, the Select Committee, the short-term lets, which is on page 63 of the papers. I'd like to begin by thanking the Scrutiny Select Committee for the work that they've done on this. I think it's an excellent, very comprehensive report. I think Councillor Carlo is going to give us a brief outline, and just invite some other members of the Select Committee to add to that. And then we've got a series of recommendations at the end of the report. So Councillor Carlo, if I could hand over to you, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to start off by thanking my fellow Scrutiny Committee members. Also, the officers. I'd like to thank Emma, Carol, David and Adam for their important input as well. They're just going to make a few comments and then to invite my colleagues to speak as well. So I think overall our research showed or indicated that there's been a big rise in Norwich in the number of whole properties let on a short-term basis since 2018. There are nearly 500 whole properties advertised on Airbnb alone. I think we found that a lot of what's been happening has fallen really below the council's radar. The council doesn't have a good picture of the number of short stay lets, the impacts on neighbours and on the housing supply, whether the short stay lets comply with health and safety regulations, and to what extent they are a benefit or a drain on the city's finances. And the officers have helped to think about these issues. So as a result of falling below the radar, the council doesn't have any policies on short stay lets, but that's partly because the development management, well, really entirely because the development management plan policies were adopted before short stay lets began to really take off. And the lack of any policies has been helpfully highlighted by in a letter submitted by a member of the public who's commented on the scrutiny report. Our comment here is really been overtaken by Graham's comment, and I'm sure he'll probably say more. So one of the recommendations made by the Select Committee is for the Sustainable Development Committee to consider whether a policy on short stay lets is needed as part of the forthcoming review of the development management plan. And I think probably Graham's going to comment on that. So I'm now going to hand over to Adam, Kate and Laura for them to make comments as well. So thank you.
Shall I kick off? Yeah, I'll be brief. Hopefully all the committee members have had a chance to read the written report. I think from my perspective, at least, I hope, well, possibly the whole committee's perspective, I think the common thread running through all of the issues, whether it's relating to ASB, whether it's relating to health and safety, whether it's relating to finances, I think the common thread running through it is the deregulated nature of the section. And until Whitehall is minded to implement a compulsory registration and licensing scheme that it fully funds local authorities to operate, until it reforms planning law to create a separate planning use class, I don't think a huge amount is going to change. And given the general direction of this government, it seems that they're more interested in deregulating planning and licensing matters further rather than introducing new regulation. So I'm not very hopeful that the issues explored in the report are going to be resolved anytime soon. But there are some concrete recommendations we've made for the City Council, and hopefully they can be reflected on. And I'll shut up there so other people can speak.
Kate, are you happy for me to go next? Well,
yes.
Anyway.
Yes, yeah. That's fine. I haven't got anything to add, really.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I agree mainly with what Adam and Denise have been saying, but there's also issues around, obviously things have moved on quite significantly since the subgroup first met, in that COVID-19 has overtaken just about everything that our council is doing. So on page 78, we talk about owing to resource constraints, there is a limit to what the City Council can achieve on its own. And I think that's even more so now. However, as Adam says, there are a number of recommendations that we could, that Cabinet could take forward. So I'm hoping that that's something that Scrutiny Committee agrees with. And that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver, did you want to add anything? Or okay,
That's
great.
all good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Osborne has indicated that he has a question. So Councillor Osborne, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, just to say thank you to the members of the Task and Finish group and the officers, because it's a really comprehensive and good report, and I support all the recommendations in it. Obviously, another way that things have moved on since this met is the government's brought forward their planning changes, which is currently out for consultation until end of October. And I assume that if these recommendations are approved here and then approved by Cabinet, that those letters to the government will be submitted before the end of October. I wouldn't imagine it will take too long, but just maybe it's worth including in the council's submission to the consultation some of these points, particularly about the specific planning use, and the points in recommendation 8. So I suppose the question is whether that can be included in the council's response to the planning for the future consultation.
Do you want me to just comment on that proposition? Because I think that relates back to the point that Councillor Carlo was raising about recommendation 6. Clearly, there's a lot of work gone into this report, and particularly in terms of recommendation 6, it was quite timely because earlier this year the council sort of reaffirmed its intention to review its development management policies plan starting next year, effectively to commence that process. That was the indicative timetable we set out in our local development scheme. The point that obviously has happened more recently is the government has published the planning white paper, and that is clearly only a white paper, so it's just a statement of suggested government policy. It's subject to consultation, but the impression that the government is giving on that is that that is likely to be taken forward at some pace, and the implications for the forward planning process are quite stark in certain ways, and one of its proposals is effectively to simplify the local plan process, so it is a single map based zonal planning system rather than the current document and policy based planning system that we have, where effectively currently we have 3 overlapping plans, a strategy setting out the strategic approach that applies across Greater Norwich, a development management policies plan that guides the decision making process, and a separate site allocations document. Effectively, all that would be under the emerging proposals would be swept away into a single document that then followed up by design codes. And as I read the planning white paper, the government's intention is to then move to local authorities having far less scope to influence policy, more scope to influence effectively design and what is zoned where, but having a more simple nationally set based rules system that apply within those areas. Effectively, as I read it, the scope for the council being able to do the sort of thing that is suggested through the development management policies is in danger of, well, is is, if you take the white paper at face value, that's being eroded. That ability is being taken away from councillors in order to work in that way. Now, clearly, we're taking a draft response to the next meeting of the Sustainable Development Panel. So a number of the members of this panel who are on that panel will be able to have their say on the emerging comments, on the emerging response to the white paper before it goes to Cabinet through on October the 14th. So if you don't feel it's adequately picked up when you see the draft response, I would encourage you to make that comment at Sustainable Development Panel, so you can get that sense on it, and we can reflect that in the draft Cabinet paper before it's finalised.
And the other thing that's worth pointing out on that from a purely sort of practical council perspective is that the recommendations from this committee today will also be presented to Cabinet on the 14th of October. So as well as SD panel's recommendations, Cabinet will be considering this at the same time. So I guess that can all be looked at in the round in terms of their ultimate overall submission. Does anyone else? I think Councillor Stuteley has a question, and then if anyone else would like to indicate any questions, comments, points about this report, that would be great. Thank you. But Councillor Stuteley.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for the report. I agree with these recommendations, and I'd be interested to hear the views of our local MPs on the report and the recommendations. So therefore, I have a suggestion to add to the recommendations to write to Chloe Smith MP and Clive Lewis MP and seek their views on the report and our recommendations. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Stuteley. Are members of the committee happy that we can do that in essence? Jackie, from a procedural point of view, do you need anything formal there, or the general nods from the committee acceptable?
Chair, that's fine. I would just point out that, just to remind members, that SDP is an advisory board, so 6 would be making recommendations.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other questions from members on this excellent report, which is clearly the product of much work and research? I think it's the fact that we've had members of the public engaging with it, I think, has been really, really useful. So any other questions? Are we happy? Oh, Councillor Carlo.
Yes, could we ask, please, our officers Carol and David about their thoughts generally on short-term lets in terms of their work areas, planning and revenues and benefits. And also I wonder if we should add another recommendation that this will be done as a matter of course, but just to formalise it really, that we write to the member of the public who's written in and commented. I think this was Adam's suggestion, and we make a full response to their suggestions and comments, please.
Yeah, on that last point, Councillor Carlo, that is already in train at the moment to write to the member of the public. So yes, that's been picked up. But if David or Carol wish to add anything at this stage, David, your hand's up.
Thank you. I think my main I am a little bit concerned about the kind of resource implications of some of the proposals in terms of the kind of monitoring and the kind of more proactive kind of enforcement role, which I think in an ideal world, I mean, enforcement would be more proactive, but yeah, there are resource implications for some of the recommendations going forward. In terms of kind of monitoring, and I think some of the responsibilities, for example, the monitoring of health and safety standards, and the suggestion that planning kind of investigates those. I don't think we could kind of do those on our own, because we kind of don't enforce those standards. So we would need to kind of co-opt other departments and also potentially the fire service. So yeah, just to kind of flag that there are, and I'm sure members appreciate it. In fact, some of the select committee members mentioned it, but there are obviously resource implications for some of these things going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Carol, did you have anything you wanted to add?
From a revenues perspective, the major problem we have is actually identifying them, and anything that we can put in place that would actually identify them and actively present them in a way that we can actually locate these, because quite often they sit in a council tax area, and we only know when they decide that they want to get rid of the premium that gets charged on empty properties. There's no planning, so we don't know most of those, and I think the biggest issue for me is the fact that when you put them into business rates, they've only got to be available to rent out for 140 days a year, but they don't have to rent it out for one day, because there can always be a reason why it can't be rented out. So it's kind of frustrating to us that we struggle with administering it properly. So anything that actually helps us to administer it correctly is welcome.
Thank you for that. There's an interesting point on the business rates, of course, going into lockdown, when if you had people who were registered for business rates, they could have had the £10,000, even though they weren't actually ever using it for business purposes. And,
absolutely, most frustrating.
Yes, indeed. Councillor McCartney-Gray, did I see you indicating with a question?
Yes, it wasn't really a question. It was just a suggestion that where it looks like, because we talked about limited resources, especially at this time, so it's actually adding something in about where resources are available. Does that make sense? David was talking about struggling perhaps with some of them because they are resource heavy. If we perhaps, I don't know if we needed to add to the recommendations where City Council and partner resources are available. Was that just complicating it too much?
I think I don't know how we'd add it in, but from a sort of purely practical point of view, and Jackie made the point about SD panel being advisory, as is scrutiny. We make recommendations to Cabinet. So Cabinet will always look at our recommendations in the context of resource availability. So to a certain extent, it is kind of implied at the point it gets to Cabinet, although I do accept the concerns that David has raised. I mean, if the committee is happy, we'll leave it as is and wait for the comments from Cabinet at the point that the report is presented to them on October the 14th. Does that sound viable? Does anyone else have any comments that they wish to make on this report?
Chair, I just wanted to reiterate what Denise said about thanking Emma, Carol and David as well, and all the other officers that have spent so much time in assisting the production of this report. I know it's taken up a lot of time, and it's hugely appreciated.
Yes, here. I'll echo that, and it's worth reminding, I suppose, the committee when we're considering task and finish groups, that although they are, select committees, although they are member-led and member-driven, they don't happen without a significant amount of officer time, resource and input, and we're eternally grateful for that. So on that, are people happy that we'll take these recommendations as presented and they can be submitted to Cabinet for comment at the next meeting of Cabinet? Yeah, I'm getting lots of thumbs up there. Great, thank you. Well, in which case, we'll then dart back on the agenda to item 5, which is our work programme for the rest of this civic year. One of the items, of course, the things that came out of the speaking to the LEP is I've got a tweak that we might need to make to the work programme if people are happy, which is that our next meeting, our October meeting, we add on to the work programme for that to consider the answers we received to the questions today, plus the written questions, and make any recommendations based on our scrutiny of the LEP. Are people happy that that is added into next month's work programme? Thumbs up, I think. Is that a question or a thumbs up, Councillor Giles?
Chair, I was just going to suggest we sort of possibly restrict that to the first half an hour.
Yeah, no, yeah.
So that we still get a good, solid meeting in on the community development topic.
No, absolutely. I think because we're effectively at the recommendation stage that we simply ran out of time for today, and we'll have the written answers to the questions ahead of time. So yes, that makes absolute sense. It won't be a substantive item by any stretch of the imagination. Other things on the work programme, I'll be talking with Chris Hancock with regard to scoping out fully the item for the 19th of November, which is maximising opportunities to achieve zero rough sleeping following COVID-19. I hope to be able to have those discussions, if possible, ahead of the October meeting, so that I can then share with the committee what that piece of work is going to look like. We have the reports already for the October meeting, looking at Emma to nod there if I've remembered that correctly, on enhancing community development. So that piece of work is well underway as well. I'd also just like to point out that I was very pleased to hear that the Scrutiny Committee work programme is now a standing item for meetings of the corporate leadership team. So there's more of a sort of active interest being taken into the work of this committee, which is good to hear. Does anyone else have any comments or questions or that they would like to raise in relation to the work programme at this stage? Councillor Carlo, I think, and then Councillor Osborne.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask about taking forward the proposed task groups for fly tipping and ASB, please, and to ask how we're going to progress those, whether it's a question of people coming forward between now and the next meeting to offer their help. It would be a pity to drop them, given that they were recommended by members of the public.
No, absolutely. Emma, if members of the committee get in contact with you about doing some work on that and picking up with again in this civic year, is that feasible?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Chair. In fact, I'll kick that off by sending an email tomorrow to all members asking for their interest.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point actually about the fly tipping, particularly the fly tipping task and finish group, but also to say, since we don't have any other the task and finish groups now running this year, if anyone wants to join that task and finish group, I think it's an important one, and maybe help would be welcome on that.
So look out for Emma's email, I think, on that one. So yeah, great. Thank you. Councillor Giles.
Thanks, Chair. I know I did raise it in the pre-meet, but now we've got the officers here. I was just going to ask about the other three substantive topics we voted to go on the work programme for the main meetings at the July meeting. I'm conscious the work programme looks very full up, apart from maybe March, and wondered if there was any thinking as to how to progress with that and whether we need to ration those three topics we voted through at the July meeting down to the one that got the most votes back in July.
I mean, I'll take an officer steer on that, but it occurs to me that there may be some scope to put one of them on the February meeting, so that gives us two of the three, because the February meeting is further scrutiny of the budget, so we will have scrutinised the budget already in January, and will then be in February's meeting, we'll be looking at the sort of the final product. So we can definitely, I think, fit two of the three in, but if I can get an officer steer on that, maybe Emma, I'm looking at you possibly for a comment there.
Absolutely. I'm looking at the 4 items that were voted through at the last meeting. What I will do is for the work programme report for our October meeting, I will make some recommendations in there for you, Chair, as to which one of those 4 you would like to take at the February meeting. How does that sound?
Yep, that sounds great. Thank you.
Great, will do.
And just another note, there's likely to be a shift from the performance framework to January rather than December.
That's correct.
Councillor McCartney-Gray.
Yeah, sorry. Emma, could you also check on capacity in the teams around the priorities? So although we may the one we most voted for should be the one that goes forward, but there might not be capacity within the team that would look at that for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will do. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, very helpful point. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Are there any other questions or points on the work programme? If not, we'll move on to our last item, which is the just to consider the report of NHOSC. And okay, so in which case we'll go on to item 6, which is NHOSC. Councillor McCartney-Gray, I think you suggested you might be able to, although we don't have, rather than give us a verbal report now, circulate a written one after the meeting.
Yeah, I can send a written one round because it will cover two NHOSC meetings, which covered everything from the I've got to remember to get this right, the Norfolk and Waveney Clinical Commissioning Group, our new commissioning organisation, their recovery plan for COVID. We had items on dentistry, end-of-life care, and the NSFT recovery plan.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Oliver, you have a question, please.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to echo thanks to Laura. I was going to substitute for one of the meetings and had terrible tech problems with Teams, so she was able to step in, which absolutely saved my life. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both. Councillor Giles.
Chair, I was just going to say, I haven't heard anything about the Community Safety Partnership. I don't know if I get in touch with Emma, whether you can give me the contact details of who I should be contacting about that. Yeah,
there was a period that I recall where it didn't meet from one year to the next, and so our representative on it didn't ever have any meetings to attend. Let's hope this isn't one of those years. But yes, if Emma could,
I'll try and get something out of it, even if it's not me to.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
For you, and I'll come back to you on that one, Councillor Giles. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you to our reps and subs who go to those external meetings, because they're very helpful to find out what's going on at a county level. So I think we've conducted everything now. So in that case, I will conclude the meeting just before 6:30. Thank you all very much, and we will meet again next month, and we'll see each other on Zoom for full council on Tuesday. So thank you very much. Goodbye.